wind howled through the wooden beams of the trading post, carrying with it an unsettling chill that seemed to permeate everything. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight that managed to cut through the cracks, a thin veil of warmth in an otherwise frozen world. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, laden with the scents of salted meats, cured leather, and the sharp tang of iron. The trading post, a hub of rugged survival, was where stories mingled, lives intersected, and desperation often found a home. At one corner of the room, huddled against the rough-hewn wall, was a young woman. Her clothes were threadbare, patched in places yet still too wide for her frail frame. She had lost weight over the months. Hunger gnawed at her insides like a wild animal. Her eyes, once sparked with light, now glimmered with a dull sheen of hope desperately clinging on. "Please," she murmured, her voice surprisingly steady but laced with desperation. Her hands, thin and pale, reached out toward a merchant behind the counter who was stacking barrels of goods like they were the very essence of life itself. "Just a loaf. I promise I'll work for it." The merchant, a burly man with a grizzled beard, looked down at her with a mixture of sympathy and disdain. His fingers brushed over the goods, but his heart was solid as stone. "I can't help you," he grunted, turning back to his work with a dismissive wave. Every eye in the room was drawn toward her, a silent crowd consuming the moment as if it were a feast for their souls. Some turned away, unseeing, unwilling to share in her burden. Others kept watching, the flicker of something stirring within them, pity perhaps, or a nagging sense of guilt. But then, just as the room's atmosphere shifted into the realm of despair, the door creaked open. A gust swept through, followed by the clinking of metal and the sharp scent of gunpowder. A soldier stepped in, tall, robust, adorned in a uniform that caught the dim light like a beacon. His presence commanded attention, an authority that made the air crackle with life. The room seemed to hold its breath as he shook the cold from his coat, revealing his weathered face, framed with a thick jaw and compassionate eyes that had seen much. He surveyed the scene, taking in the young woman who was now trembling, not knowing whether to melt away into the shadows or to stand resolute in her plight. The soldier's gaze softened as he approached, sensing the energy coalescing in the space around them. He asked, his voice low but charged with an urgency that penetrated the weariness of the room. The young woman blinked at him, eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and hope. I just need bread. I'm hungry." Her words spilled out, each one laced with the weight of her experiences. The soldier's gaze hardened slightly as he turned to the merchant, who stood slumped at the counter. "She needs help." With a grunt, the merchant folded his arms across his chest, trying to maintain his facade of indifference. "What do you suggest? She's a beggar." "Beggar or not, she's a human being," the soldier shot back, his voice rising with conviction. The room hung in silence, tension spiraling in the air like smoke. The merchant opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out as the soldier's intense gaze held him captive. In that moment, it wasn't just about bread anymore. It was an age-old conflict between compassion and selfishness, humanity and indifference. The young woman stepped forward, her gaze shifting nervously between the two men, the heat of the moment washing over her. "Please," she said, her voice trembling but unyielding. "I can work, I'm strong." The soldier turned toward her, an unexpected spark of determination igniting within him. His voice softened in contrast to the tension. She swallowed hard, the name catching in her throat like a pained whisper. "Kala," he repeated, as if savoring the sound. Kala nodded, overwhelmed by the kindness flooding through her, yet shadowed by uncertainty. But the soldier didn't let go. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone. "I'm going to help you." He turned back to the merchant, fire ignited in his eyes. "It's Christmas soon. You're going to find a way to provide some bread for her, a few loaves at least. She has a village to feed also. You can afford it." The merchant slowly uncrossed his arms, the fire in the soldier's voice melting the ice around his heart. He countered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "For one, you're saving a life. Then you'll have a customer for life. Someone who will remember how you showed compassion when few did," the soldier shot back, each word firm, unwavering. Finally, the merchant's facade crumbled. He slumped his shoulders, all fight leaving him. "2 loaves, that's it." With a nod from the soldier, the merchant grumbled begrudgingly as he moved to gather the bread. The moment hung in the air, fragile yet potent, an electric intermingling of hope and fear, where a single act of kindness could tip the scale. And then, like melting ice under newfound warmth, something began to shift in Calla. As the merchant handed over the rough loaves, slightly stale yet steeped in the promise of sustenance, she could feel the walls she built around her heart beginning to crack. The soldier's grin broke through his stoic expression. "You're welcome, but this is just the beginning, Calla. Keep fighting." As she took the bread, it felt like far more than just nourishment. It was a lifeline, a tangible reminder that kindness could still exist in a world soaked in darkness. With the bread held tight against her chest, Calla glanced around the trading post. People resumed their business, but now the undercurrent of tension had transformed into something palpable, hope blooming like wildflowers after the first rain. But that bliss was fleeting. The past tightened its grip around Calla. Memories of her village, overrun by desperation, haunted her thoughts. The cries of starving children, the shadows of despair that hovered like a specter, were seared into her mind. Survival was not just a matter of will, it had become a fight against an overwhelming tide. The soldier, a stranger until moments ago, had ignited something dormant in her. Fueled by his conviction, she took a deep breath and decided she wouldn't just accept this kindness. She would pay it forward, turning the tide in whatever way she could. Days turned into weeks. Calla gained strength, her spirit hardening with each passing moment. She began working not just for herself, but for the members of the community who had turned a blind eye to her suffering. She became a beacon of hope, helping neighbors during the harsh winters, teaching children how to forage for food, sharing the life lessons she had learned in the crucible of her own experiences. One evening, she found herself at that same trading post, but now it was transformed a place of gathering, of laughter and camaraderie. The soldier returned occasionally, his presence filling the room with a sense of protection. Like a warrior among the weary, he inspired resilience among the ragtag group of townsfolk. Calla approached him, her heart fluttering with gratitude. "You fought for me when no one else would." He chuckled softly, that fierce light still shining in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me. You did the fighting. You took the bread, and from that day forward, you became more than a survivor." As she looked around, she realized they were more than just survivors. They were a community. The village began to flourish, nourished by shared strength and the courage to confront despair. Years passed, the seasons turning like the pages of a well-worn book. Calla, once a frail girl begging for bread, had transformed into a leader fiery and brave. A soldier's kindness had changed the course of her life and the lives around her. It was the little things, laughter shared, stories told under starlit skies, the warmth of companionship, that began to fill the cracks left by hunger and hardship. Calla, now a vibrant woman, often thought back to that day at the trading post, the vulnerable moment when a soldier stepped in. That lesson became etched deep within her. Kindness can fuel triumph over despair. It teaches you to take a stand, to become your own soldier. It ignites a fire that can light the way, not just for oneself, but for a whole community that rises together, through every storm, every challenge. And it all started with a simple loaf of bread. The door of the trading post swung open with a groan that echoed through the dusty room. The chill of the outside world rushed in, a biting wind that carried the scent of winter, a stark reminder of the days to come. Inside, the atmosphere was thick, heavy with the lingering smells of cured meats and spices mingling in an awkward dance of survival. In the back corner, a flickering candle shivered, casting shadows against the wooden beams. That's where she was, tucked into the crevice like a forgotten relic. A young woman, not more than 20, with hollow cheeks and tired eyes that spoke of hunger and despair. She wore clothes that hung loosely on her frail frame, patched and worn from endless wear. The line between hope and despair had blurred, but today she found a sliver of courage, a flicker of light that pushed her forward. "Please," her voice quivered as she summoned all the strength she could muster. She stood, her thin hands trembling, extending them toward the merchant who was sorting through the goods. "Just a loaf of bread. I'll work for it." The merchant, a burly man with a rough beard and eyes like cold steel, barely lifted his gaze. He brushed her aside with a wave. "Can't help you." His tone was callous, dripping with indifference. A murmur spread through the few patrons gathered inside, all eyes flickering between the young woman and the merchant. Some turned away, uncomfortable, while others watched with a slight hint of curiosity, wondering if she would crumble under the weight of rejection. Calla, that was her name. Calla felt despair claw at her throat, yet she stood firm. She looked around the room, scanning the faces that held stories of their own sorrow. The world had grown cold, much colder than she had ever known. With winter bearing down, food was scarce, and she had no choice but to beg, an act that left her feeling more exposed than she ever wanted to be. Suddenly, the door creaked again, pulling the room's attention. In walked a soldier, tall and rugged, his uniform crisp against the chaos that surrounded him. The clinking of metal accompanied him, a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped the room. His presence filled the air, and a spark of life ignited as he stepped inside. The soldier scanned the room and zeroed in on Calla. His eyes softened as he approached her, each step filled with purpose. The warmth of his presence sliced through the cold indifference like a knife. He asked, his voice steady yet firm. Calla's heart raced as she explained her plight. "I just need a loaf, I'm starving." The soldier's gaze shifted to the merchant, eyes narrowing, the air thickening with unspoken tension. "You can't turn her away." The merchant huffed, folding his arms defensively. In that moment, the soldier's frustration peaked, but instead of anger, he drew on something deeper, something that sought to connect rather than tear down. "You may not see Calla as worth feeding, but look around you. Look at the faces of those who are suffering." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The flickering candlelight danced like whispers of hope against the walls. The other patrons leaned in, captivated by the rising tension, but none dared to intervene. Calla felt the heat of emotions swirling around her, the currents of despair, compassion, and injustice colliding in an invisible tide. Her eyes darted from the soldier to the merchant, seeking an answer, anything that would give way to kindness. At last, the merchant sighed, defeated by the unexpected resolve of the soldier. "I'll give her 2 loaves, but no more, not a single crumb. It's not my job to feed the world," he muttered, turning back to fetch the bread. The soldier nodded, his expression one of quiet triumph. He turned back to Calla, his gaze steady. "Don't forget this moment." Calla could hardly believe what was happening. As the merchant gruffly handed over the bread, warmth flooded her heart. She clutched the loaves against her chest, tears threatening to spill from her eyes, the weight of gratitude almost overwhelming. "Thank you, I promise to pay it forward," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling tension. With a smile that mirrored both encouragement and belief, the soldier turned to leave. But then he paused, casting one last glance over his shoulder. "Find me when you can. You've got strength in you." And just like that, he was gone, swept back out into the biting wind. The trading post seemed fuller, lighter somehow, as if his presence had filled the void of despair with a spark of hope. Days turned into weeks, and Calla did not forget. The warmth of that single moment transformed into an ember, igniting a fire in her spirit. She had taken the bread, not just for her own survival, but as a promise of vow to herself and to others like her. She wouldn't let despair claim her or those around her. As the harsh winter wore on, she became a familiar face in the village, not just a beggar but a force of resilience. Supporting neighbors, sharing her meager resources, she learned to make the most of what little she had. Each day she rose with the sun, scouring the landscape for food, gathering whatever she could find to help the community. It became contagious. The villagers began to rally, drawn in by Calla's spirit. They shared stories, pooled resources, and discovered that even the smallest acts of kindness created ripples. The once quiet trading post buzzed with life as conversations flourished, laughter erupted, and meals were shared among neighbors. The sound of hope replaced the echo of despair. Months passed. The landscape began to thaw, and spring emerged, warming the hearts of those who had endured a relentless winter. Calla had transformed from a girl begging for bread into a young woman revered for her strength and compassion. Citizens leaned on one another, forging bonds stronger than the harshest winter. Yet, one day, just as she was distributing food to the families gathered around a makeshift table. A familiar figure appeared at the edge of the gathering. It was the soldier. As soon as she spotted him, her heart raced, a flash of gratitude igniting her spirit. He called, striding toward her with confidence. The air seemed to ripple with energy, each step an affirmation of their shared journey. "Thank you for coming back," she said, overwhelmed, but exhilaration bubbled in her chest. "You were right." He smiled, a proud, warm grin that lit up his eyes. "I knew you wouldn't. You were meant for more than just surviving, Calla." As they stood together amid the laughter and chatter, Calla couldn't shake the weight of that first moment at the trading post. It had been a vital link in a long chain. It had fueled something powerful, a rising tide that lifted many out of despair. "You showed me what it means to hold on to hope," she said, her voice steady and sure. The soldier nodded, his demeanor shifting, grounding in the moment that had led them here. "It's not just about one moment," he said thoughtfully. "It's about the moments that follow." With renewed strength, Calla turned to the gathering crowd. "Let's continue to support one another." As she spoke, something shifted in the air, a shift that echoed deep in the hearts of everyone present. They were united, bound not just by shared hardship but by their commitment to lift one another up. Weeks turned to months and the seasons changed, but the spirit of that moment endured. Calla became known as a beacon in the village, a true leader whose heart relentlessly fought against the tide of despair. She continued to gather others, finding unique ways to enrich their lives. They collectively grew gardens, shared knowledge, and built a community around compassion, a community that thrived even amidst adversity. Every so often, she would look back at that day at the trading post, the day everything shifted. Calla realized it wasn't just bread she had accepted. It was a lifeline, a bond of empathy that connected them all. Each loaf, a reminder of how small acts of kindness can weave through lives, creating an intricate tapestry of resilience, strength, and hope. And so every loaf shared, every moment of kindness passed on became a thread binding them all together, a legacy that flourished long after the harshest winters gave way to brighter days. In a world that can often feel cold and pitiless, Calla came to understand one fundamental truth. Even in the darkest times, the light ignited by compassion could illuminate the path forward, guiding not just one but many hearts toward a better tomorrow. The door of the trading post swung open with a loud creak, and the cold wind rushed in like an unwelcome guest. The scent of dusty leather mingled with the sharp tang of iron, wrapping around the dimly lit room. Patrons huddled in clusters, exchanging hushed conversations, their faces lined with weariness from the harsh winter. Among them, in a shadowy corner, sat a young woman, her eyes downcast, a ghost of her former self. Calla, that was her name. She was not just hungry, she was hollowed out, a shell of a person who had once walked with a lightness in her step. Hunger twisted her stomach like a vice, but today, desperation pushed her forward. With thin hands trembling, she lifted them toward the merchant standing behind the counter, sorting through baskets of goods like he held the secrets of the universe. "Please," she said, her voice a threadbare whisper. "I just need a loaf of bread." The merchant barely looked up from his work. He was a giant of a man, his rough beard flecked with bits of dried flour and crumbs. "Can't help you with that, lady," he grunted, his voice as hard as the wooden counter. A murmur swept through the crowd, floating like a dark cloud. Faces turned away, shielding themselves from the raw, uncomfortable truth of her situation. Some showed disdain, others perhaps shame. But in that moment, Calla was alone, a solitary figure pleading for the very thing that could keep her alive. Her heart raced, and she felt the sting of tears pooling in her eyes. It was more than just the bread. It was the weight of rejection, the laughter she could hear in her mind, echoing her worthlessness. It felt like the walls of the trading post were closing in on her, pressing down, suffocating. But just then, the door swung open again, this time with purpose. A soldier strode in, his uniform crisp and proud. The atmosphere shifted immediately, the air crackling with an unexpected energy. The soldier was tall and strong, his face weathered but kind, as if he held stories within him, stories that could both inspire and heal. He paused at the entrance, his sharp gaze taking in the scene. There was something magnetic about him, a fierce determination that danced in his eyes. As the wind howled outside, wrapping around the edges of the town, he stepped forward. He asked, his voice cutting through the murmur of disbelief like a sword through fog. Kala's heart raced as she looked at him, her breath catching in her throat. I just need a loaf of bread, she managed to say, her voice trembling. The merchant snorted, his arms crossed defiantly. I don't feed beggars, he repeated, the words hard and unyielding. The soldier's expression changed, shifting from skepticism to fierce resolve. Is that how we treat someone in need? His words rang out, filled with an undeniable power that held everyone in place. Kala felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her. Would this soldier stand up for her? Would he be the one to see her humanity? Look, the soldier continued, stepping closer. I know times are hard, but that doesn't mean we abandon compassion. He turned to the merchant, his voice steady. You have bread, give her a few loaves. The air thickened with tension as the merchant hesitated, his resolve wavering. Kala could feel the weight of the moment, her heart pounding like a drum. Would he agree? Or would he let her slip away into the shadows? Fine, the merchant relented reluctantly, shooting the soldier a glare. 2 loaves, that's it. As the merchant grudgingly turned to gather the bread, Kala felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Here she was, on the brink of despair, and suddenly the world offered her a lifeline, a simple act of kindness from a stranger in a uniform. When the merchant returned, he placed the loaves on the counter with a thud, as if declaring that these items of sustenance were worthless. Kala reached out, her fingers brushing over the rough crust, and she could hardly contain her emotions. Thank you, she whispered, and the words felt like an invocation, a promise to herself and to whoever had been watching. The soldier smiled, and in that moment it felt like the sun broke through the bleakness, illuminating everything around them. Remember this moment, Kala. Hold on to it, use it to fuel your fire. Kala nodded, clutching the loaves like treasures. I will. Before the soldier turned to leave, he paused, looking back one last time. If you ever need help, find me. With that, he stepped back into the winter's breath, leaving Kala standing there with her heart full and her spirit reignited. Days slipped into weeks, and each night, Kala remembered that moment, the soldier's unwavering strength, the way he stood up to the merchant. It fueled her, a fire in her belly urging her to rise above the daily struggles. She found ways to help her neighbors, sharing what little food she could gather, building connections where she could. Each act of kindness became a thread weaving through the community, unraveling despair and spinning warmth instead. As winter pressed on, Kala learned to hunt for food, to trade what she could, to find the laughter buried beneath layers of hardship. A sense of belonging burgeoned in her heart, pushing out the shadows. One chilly morning, she walked through the village, a basket slung over her arm filled with vegetables she had gathered. She approached families who had been too proud to ask for help, offering kindness and understanding. My door is always open, she would say, and gradually, walls began to crumble. But beneath the surface, Kala felt a restless energy growing. She wanted more. She yearned for a way to make a real difference, just like the soldier had done for her. One evening, the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the trading post. She gathered courage and stepped inside. The merchant was busy at his counter, engaged in conversation with a few men, but she felt a determination rising inside her. She asked, her voice steady. The merchant looked up at her, confusion furrowing his brow. I want to help others like me who need food, shelter, and a place to belong, she declared, her heart racing. I know that you have spare food and resources. Let's gather them, share them with the community. Slowly, the merchant's expression softened. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but Kala pressed on. You might not see it, but it's our humanity that connects us. There's a soldier out there who taught me that lesson. He stood up for me, offered me kindness when I had nothing. The silence stretched, but something shifted in the air. Kala could almost see the gears turning in the merchant's mind. He had seen the resilience of the community, the way they were beginning to come together. Maybe, just maybe, they could pool their resources. With a reluctant sigh, he nodded slowly. Okay, we can start small. Joy filled Kala's heart, but she knew this was just the beginning. They crafted a plan, reaching out to others in the community, inviting them to join. Day by day, they gathered children, families, elders, all coming together to share what they had. They became a network, an intricate web of support woven by empathy. The trader, once stingy and hard, transformed alongside them. Merchants from neighboring towns began to notice the changes, seeing the community flourish, feel the vibrancy in the air. They began to donate excess goods, and the once desolate trading post became a beacon of hope. The day the soldier returned, Kala felt a rush of excitement. He stepped inside the bustling trading post, his presence strong, proud as he looked around at the laughter, the shared meals, the connections binding them together. "Look at this," he said, eyes shining. "You did this, Kala." "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, breathless. "You planted the seed." As they stood amidst the crowded room, both aware of the journey that had brought them here, Kala finally understood the depth of kindness. It could shatter walls, heal wounds, and transform despair into possibility. Seasons changed, and the village prospered. Kala became a leader, not just because of her courage but through her compassion. The soldier's words echoed in her mind. Every act matters, and she made sure kindness remained at the heart of everything they built. Over time, the village became a thriving community, a safe haven for those seeking solace and refuge. And though the harsh winters still came, they were met with resilience, laughter, and an unwavering spirit. Kala often glanced out through the trading post doors, watching as children played and families gathered. Each face told a story, a narrative woven together through shared struggles and triumphs. In that small piece of the world, they had risen above hardship, illuminating a path of understanding, connection, and hope. The door had opened not just to the trading post, but to something much more profound, a place where every heart had a chance, where every story mattered, and where kindness, once a simple gesture, had grown to become a way of life. The wind howled outside, swirling flakes of snow against the wooden walls of the trading post. Inside, it was bustling yet tense, as the chill from the season pressed against every soul packed into the narrow space. A hearth crackled at one end, but its warmth barely reached the corners where people huddled in tight clusters, exchanging furtive glances. In a dim-lit corner, a young woman sat cross-legged on the worn wooden floor. Kala, her name, was her face drawn by hunger, her clothes ragged and ill-fitting. She was barely more than a shadow of herself, skin stretched tight over sharp bones, eyes wide and pleading. Today was a desperate day, one that urged her heart to beat harder against the weight of her sorrow. Her voice barely cut through the chatter, feeble like the dying embers in the hearth. "I'll work for it." The merchant behind the counter hardly glanced her way, his broad back stooped over a pile of goods, meats, grains, and other provisions. He was a burly man, hardened by years of managing the trading post, and the sight of her barely made a dent in his steely demeanor. "No charity here," he barked without looking up, voice cold as the winter wind outside. Despair washed over her, threatening to drown her spirit. Kala felt the stares of onlookers pinning her down, some shaking their heads in pity, others turning away in discomfort. She could almost hear their unspoken thoughts. Just another beggar. But hunger gnawed at her insides louder than their judgments. Each day was a battle, a struggle to simply exist in a world that had turned its back on her. She needed to eat, she needed to survive. And so, with her heart pounding, she took a step forward. "I promise I'll work. I'll do anything you need," she pleaded again, her voice straining through the tight knot of fear in her throat. Just then, the door creaked open, and gusts of cold air swept into the room, pulling everyone's attention toward the entrance. In walked a soldier, tall and robust, his uniform crisp even against the bitter cold. A wave of energy followed him, causing hushed conversations to fall silent as he surveyed the scene. With a presence that demanded respect, he strode into the center of the trading post. He asked, voice low and steady, the warmth of his breath mixing with the frost in the air. His eyes settled on Kala, instantly recognizing the spark of desperation in her gaze. "Just another beggar," the merchant grumbled, shaking his head dismissively as he returned to his work. The soldier's brows furrowed, anger flickering in his dark eyes as he shifted his focus to Kala. He asked, his tone sharp yet filled with an underlying gentleness that wrapped around Kala like a warm blanket. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, breathing life into the shadows as the village's distrust began to dissolve. Without knowing it, Calla felt something stir within her, a small flicker of hope ignited by the soldier's unwavering stance against the coldness that surrounded them. "I need help," she said, her voice soft yet firm, rallying strength from deep inside. "Help should never come with shame," the soldier declared, turning to the merchant with a fire ignited in his words. "These are people, this woman is a person." The merchant crossed his arms defiantly, the lines on his face deepening. "I can't just give away my goods, soldier." His face reddened, struggling between the stubbornness of his pride and the mounting public pressure gathering around them. "Your business is not just to sell, it's to serve," the soldier insisted, undeterred. The crowd began to lean in, an audience drawn to the collision of indifference and compassion unfolding before them. Calla could feel the weight of their eyes settling on her, but this time it was different. They were no longer judging her. They were witnesses to her struggle, rallying around the fire sparked by the soldier's conviction. Finally, the merchant sighed, the fight ebbing from his frame. All right," he muttered, his voice strained. "2 loaves." Without waiting for further argument, Calla felt a surge of gratitude as the merchant reluctantly handed over the rough loaves, their crusts darkened but filled with sustenance. She accepted them with trembling hands, the weight of the bread an anchor amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaky but resolute. This simple gift, a loaf of bread, felt like a lifeline, an invisible thread binding her to the world that had almost let her fall away. The soldier smiled, a beam of warmth cutting through the winter chill. "You don't have to repay this right away. Just remember to pay it forward when you can." With that, he turned and walked back toward the door, his figure framed against the black cold beyond. Calla's heart leaped as he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Find me if you need support again." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Calla standing amidst a swirl of emotions, clutching the loaves against her chest. Hope flickered within her like the flames of the hearth, intertwining with determination. She would not let this act of kindness go to waste. As the days turned into weeks, Calla grew stronger, not just from the bread she received, but from the resolve that blossomed inside her. She began doing small things, helping neighbors, offering companionship to the elderly, sharing what little food she could find. Each day, she would replay the moment in the trading post, drawing upon the strength of the soldier's voice. Little by little, the community began to change. People started to notice Calla and her small acts of kindness. They began to gather, sharing stories, laughter, and support. From the most unlikely places, kindness spread like wildfire, igniting hope where despair had once taken root. She realized that each tiny grain of connection had the power to uplift. Inspired by the change growing around her, Calla began organizing gatherings where families could come together, share food, and build connections. It was a slow progression, but with every session, the village became more vibrant, alive with a sense of purpose and togetherness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Calla found herself at the trading post again. It was wider now, filled with laughter and chatter as people showcased their creations, baskets of goods, freshly baked bread, and vegetables from humble gardens. The farmer's wife had baked cakes, and the smiles bloomed brighter as families shared meals together. The soldier walked in, noticing the bustling energy instantly. A slow smile crept across his face as he took in the community thriving before him. His eyes scanned the room until they found Calla, who now radiated strength, her face glowing with the flavors of shared warmth. "Look at this," he said, his voice rich with pride. "It's amazing what kindness can do," she replied, feeling the swell of joy in her heart. The warmth of the hearth glowed around them, and laughter danced like music through the air. He asked, a teasing lilt to his voice. "More or less," Calla said, her laughter mingling with his. "It took community, too." Days turned into nights, weeks into months, and the village became a beacon of hope for those who had once been lost in despair. Calla gained strength through her connection, lifting each other up, a collective heartbeat of compassion pulsing through the once desolate streets. But not everything was perfect. As winter faded into spring, shadows still lingered. The past weighed heavily on many hearts. One day, a familiar face returned to the village, a refugee from a nearby town, weary and broken. Fear gripped his heart as he saw the thriving community before him, stark contrast to his own despair. Calla spotted him among the lively crowd and felt an ache in her chest. She had made it her mission to bring people together, but now, could she extend her hand to someone who had fallen through the cracks? With her heart pounding, she approached him, gently placing a soft touch on his shoulder. "You're welcome here," she said, her voice filling the space between them with warmth. "Please let us help you." He looked up, confusion etched across his face, before nodding slowly, tears brimming in his eyes. "Kindness never dies," Calla replied fiercely. With that, they returned to the thrumming heart of the village. As the days turned to weeks, Calla worked tirelessly not only to help this newcomer, but to strengthen the bonds within the community further. She witnessed the power of shared experiences, the laughter mingling with tears, hope intertwined with fear. Each moment was a reminder of their shared humanity. The year wore on a cycle of seasons that ushered in spring blooms and summer nights filled with laughter. One day, during a festival celebrating their newfound spirit, the soldier returned again, this time dressed not in uniform but in simple clothes that marked him as one of them. The sight of him sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. He stepped forward, pride illuminating his face, the man who had once stood up for a stranger only to find himself welcomed into a family. As Calla stepped forward to greet him, she felt the warmth of countless connections in her heart. "You were so right," she said, laughter mingled with gratitude. "We all play a part," he replied, his voice rich and steady. And so together they celebrated, not just a festival but a journey they had all taken, a bond forged through shared fragility and hope. In that moment, every face around them told a story of resilience and community, woven together like the fabric of life itself. In the midst of it all, Calla realized that she had become more than just a survivor. She was a heartbeat of change. Their struggles had ignited a movement transforming a mere trading post into something more profound, a home. No one was a beggar anymore, no one was alone. Together, they had forged a safe haven, a beacon of light where every act of kindness was a thread, weaving together a vibrant tapestry that celebrated life and love. A reminder that when compassion fuels the heart, even the coldest winters can give way to unyielding warmth. And in that village, against the backdrop of blossoming flowers and the joy echoing through the streets, they learned the most powerful truth of all, that kindness in its truest form could change the world. The wind howled outside, sending a chill through the small trading post. Snowflakes danced in the air as if mocking the warmth within. Inside, patrons bustled about, chatting and exchanging goods, their voices mingling with the crackling of the fire. But in one dark corner, there was only silence. Calla hunched on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. Hunger gnawed at her insides, a fierce beast that left ravaging scars. She had become a ghost, invisible and unwanted. Her clothes were tattered and ill-fitting, remnants of a life that felt like a distant memory. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely piercing the din. "Just a loaf of bread." The merchant, a burly man with a grizzled beard, barely lifted his glance from the counter. He sorted through barrels of goods like they were sacred relics. "If you want something, work for it," he grunted, voice thick with disdain. Calla felt the air leave her lungs, desperation coursed through her veins. She could feel the stares of others, a mix of sympathy and condescension, like they were judging not just her appearance but the essence of her very being. "I don't want charity," she managed to say, her pride pushing through the fear. The merchant shrugged, resolutely refusing to engage with her pleading eyes. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with judgment and scorn. Calla's spirit was wavering, teetering on the edge. Just when she thought all was lost, the heavy door swung open again, letting in a rush of frigid air. In strode a soldier, tall and imposing, clad in a crisp uniform. His presence commanded attention, a stark contrast to the dreary atmosphere of the trading post. The crowd instinctively parted for him as he walked in, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk searching for prey. He asked, his voice deep, carrying an authority that silenced the murmurs. Calla's heart quickened. She locked eyes with him, feeling something shift deep within. "I'm just trying to get a loaf of bread. I'll work for it," she said, desperation creeping back into her voice. The soldier turned to the merchant, his brow furrowing as he awaited a response. "She's a beggar," the merchant retorted, crossing his arms defiantly. The tension in the room thickened, as if everyone held their breath waiting to see what would happen next. Calla could almost see the gears turning in the soldier's mind, weighing compassion against the harsh realities of survival. "Beggar or not, she's a human being," the soldier replied, his voice rising. "What kind of community turns its back on the vulnerable?" Calla felt a flicker of hope. "I'm not asking for more than I deserve," she interjected, her voice shaking but firm. The merchant hesitated, perhaps feeling the pressure from the audience watching the exchange. "2 loaves," he finally grumbled, begrudgingly pulling the bread from beneath the counter, tossing them towards Calla with little care. "Thank you," she breathed, feeling the weight of the loaves in her hands as if they were bricks of gold. The soldier smiled, a warmth spreading across his face like sunlight breaking through a heavy fog. "You don't have to repay this now." Calla nodded, feeling a rush of emotions, a mix of gratitude and renewed resolve. In that moment, hope flickered within her, ignited by the soldier's courage. And as he turned to leave, he gave one last look back, his eyes fierce and unwavering. "Find me if you ever need more help." With that, the door closed behind him, leaving Calla standing at the center of the trading post, clutching her loaves like a lifeline. The murmur of the crowd resumed, but this time it felt different. She sensed that a shift had occurred, that perhaps the world wasn't entirely devoid of compassion. Days turned into weeks, and Calla held onto that moment like a cherished memory. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning to thrive. Determined to pay it forward, she started doing small things, giving food to the families who struggled, offering help to those who asked. It felt empowering, like each act of kindness was a thread weaving her back into the fabric of the community. Slowly, the village began to notice her efforts. As she delivered food to a widow with children, as she gathered herbs for an elder unable to venture out, a warm connection formed among them. Calla found herself laughing again, brightening at the sight of shared smiles. Yet every so often she would find herself at the trading post, looking for the soldier. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how his simple act of kindness had sparked a fire within her. But as weeks stretched into months, he was nowhere to be found, a ghost lingering in her memory. As spring blossomed, Calla's resolve strengthened. She organized communal gatherings, inviting villagers to share food and stories. Each gathering knit the community a bit closer, unraveling threads of isolation and sowing seeds of unity. But shadows still lingered. There were whispers of hardship, families struggling under the weight of life's burdens. One cold evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Calla's heart sank when she heard of a family in dire need. An illness had swept through their home, leaving the parents unable to work. Without hesitation, she gathered what she could, a basket of fresh vegetables and the last of her dried goods, and headed to their home. As she knocked on the door and stepped inside, she was met with hollow eyes and silence hanging in the air. "Please," Calla said, her voice steady. "Let me help." Their gratitude was palpable, the weight of gratitude filling the room like an embrace. She stayed with them, helping care for the children, offering company in the quiet despair. In that moment, she found purpose. She felt the essence of community flowing through her veins. Days turned into weeks, and word spread of Calla's efforts, the kindness she extended with each meal and act of support. The villagers, inspired by her resilience, began a step forward. They found their own ways to contribute, cooking, gathering supplies, or just being there for one another. Then one fateful morning, as Calla worked in her small garden, she looked up to see a familiar silhouette walking towards her. Her heart raced as recognition flooded her senses. It was the soldier. He called, his voice deep and warm, instantly wrapping around her like a security blanket. She exclaimed, rushes of relief washing over her. He chuckled, a broad smile spreading across his face as he approached. She asked, curiosity glinting in her eyes. He gestured around them, the laughter of children playing, the busy hands of neighbors working together. "You've sparked something beautiful in this village. Your acts of kindness have inspired so many others." Tears welled in Calla's eyes, a mixture of joy and disbelief. "I didn't do anything special. That's the power of kindness," he said, his eyes full of conviction. You don't always realize the impact you have. With gratitude swelling in her chest, Calla felt the weight of responsibility transform into a lightness. They stood there together, connected by the common thread of kindness, a force capable of reshaping lives and communities. "Let's work together," Calla said, her spirit invigorated by his presence. Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side. The soldier's strength and discipline added a ripple of order to Calla's compassionate chaos. Together, they organized workshops, teaching skills, sharing knowledge, and fostering resilience. Word spread, and soon people from neighboring villages came to join them. Voices that had once felt silenced now filled the air, sharing stories, laughter, and support. But darkness still threatened at the fringes. Not everyone was receptive to this change. Skepticism loomed from a few who held tight to their beliefs, believing that generosity meant weakness, that kindness was nothing but folly. One cold evening during a gathering, one such skeptic stood up, eyes blazing with indignation. "You think you can just give everything away?" The air shifted as tension rose, the warmth evaporating like mist under the harsh glare of skepticism. Calla stepped forward, meeting his gaze with calm resolve. "It's not about giving everything away, it's about giving hope. We all need support at some point in our lives. We can stand together or fall apart." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, sympathetic glances exchanged. The soldier stepped beside her, adding his voice deep and unwavering. "What we're building here is strength, not dependence." The skeptic paused, the fire in his eyes wavering. Slowly, the tension began to dissipate. Others in the crowd chimed in, sharing their stories of hardship and resilience, how this newfound community had pulled them back from the brink. Days turned into weeks, each gathering reaffirming their strength, their shared humanity. Cultivating connections turned into celebrations of unity, and the village transformed into a safe haven where hope flourished. As summer approached, the village was thriving. Every corner buzzed with life, laughter filling the air as children played, families gathered, and friendships blossomed. But it was one quiet evening, as the sun set in a burst of color, that Calla found herself reflecting on how far they had come. She stood outside the trading post, the once barren place now a hub of connection. The soldier joined her, leaning against the wall, watching the scene before them. "You've built something incredible," he said, admiration radiating in his voice. Calla shook her head, gratitude woven into her smile. "It wasn't just me, it was all of us." As the night deepened, laughter echoed around them, wrapped in a cocoon of camaraderie. Calla glanced around, her heart swelling with pride. She had been a beggar once, a shadow begging for bread. Now she was a pillar of strength, fueled by kindness, surrounded by people who had become family. "Kindness can light the darkest corners," the soldier said, turning to her. In that moment, Calla's journey crystallized in her mind, a circle completed. From despair to hope, from loneliness to a life filled with purpose. All it took was one loaf of bread, a soldier's compassion, and the courage to face the world with an open heart. The evening stretched on, wrapped in laughter, warmth, and the echoes of a beautiful truth. That hope could sprout from the cracks of even the hardest stone. And thus, in that vibrant village, the legacy of kindness would continue to bloom, feeding the hearts of countless others in the years to come. The wind howled outside, swirling flurries of snow around the small village, burying it in white. Inside the trading post, the warmth of the fire struggled against the chill, flickering shadows dancing along the wooden walls. Patrons bustled about, their faces lined with worry, each preoccupied with the burdens life had handed them. But in one dark corner, a different kind of heaviness sat. A young woman named Calla, nearly invisible amidst the noise. Huddled against the wall, Calla's clothes hung loosely from her frail frame, remnants of a life that felt distant. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes wide with hunger and fear. She drew her knees to her chest, attempting to gather warmth as she scanned the room, searching for a glimmer of compassion. "Please," she mumbled, her voice barely breaking through the din, a plea wrapped in desperation. "Just a loaf of bread." The merchant behind the counter, a hefty man with a scruffy beard, didn't even glance her way. He continued to stack barrels and arrange goods as if she were nothing more than a ghost. "You want bread? Then work for it," he barked. The words stung, sharp as ice. A heavy silence rolled through the room, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire. Patrons turned to watch, a blend of pity and indifference clouding their features. Calla felt their eyes on her, the weight of judgment pressing down like an anchor. But she needed to fight, she had to. With trembling hands, she spoke again. "I'll work." Her heart raced, each beat echoing her desperation. Suddenly the door swung open with a loud creak, a gust of icy wind sweeping through the room. In walked a soldier, tall and imposing, his uniform crisp against the dreary background. He carried with him an aura of authority, an energy that shifted the mood in the room. Heads turned, conversations hushed, and Calla felt the spark of hope flicker in her chest. He demanded, his voice low and commanding. Calla felt instinctively drawn to him, a flicker of recognition igniting in her heart. I need a loaf of bread," she stammered, her voice wavering with the weight of her vulnerability. The soldier's gaze moved to the merchant, who stood with crossed arms, attempting to maintain an indignant posture. "She's begging. She's not worth feeding," the merchant said dismissively, irritation evident in his tone. The soldier frowned, the lines of frustration deepening on his forehead. "Is that how we treat those in need?" Calla watched as the soldier stepped closer, his intensity drawing the attention of not just the merchant but the rest of the village as well. "You have food, she needs help." Around them, whispers rippled through the gathered crowd. It felt like a shared heartbeat, a moment of quiet solidarity in an otherwise noisy room. Calla held her breath, the tension swirling, wrapping around her like a thin veil. "2 loaves," the merchant finally conceded, his voice heavy with reluctance. He moved to grab the loaves from beneath the counter, tossing them toward Calla like bone scraps, but no more. Her heart raced as she caught the bread, the warmth radiating through her palms, a gift of life when all she felt was despair. "Thank you," she breathed, tears brimming in her eyes. It felt like salvation had slipped into her hands. The soldier smiled, a genuine warmth lighting up his face. "Remember this moment, hold on to it. Kindness can change everything," he said, fixing his gaze on her. "If you need more help, find me." Before she could respond, he turned and strode out into the cold, leaving Calla standing among a chorus of fidgeting patrons. And for the first time, she felt something shift inside her, a flicker of hope igniting against the darkness. Days passed, and Calla carried that moment with her, starting to build a new life. Each time she returned to the trading post, she looked for the soldier. Hope pulsed within her. She wanted to express her gratitude, to share how his simple act had sparked something deep within her. She began to help her neighbors, bringing food to those in need, even offering to watch children when mothers needed a moment away. With each small act, she felt herself rising, stretching her wings as she began to weave her place in the fabric of the community. But there were days when despair would try to creep back in. A shadow passed over her heart, a reminder of how close she had been to losing everything. The village often looked desolate in winter, with roofs creaking under burdens of snow and the wind howling through narrow streets. One evening, while she was visiting a neighbor, she overheard whispers of another family who had fallen on hard times. Sickness had swept through their home, leaving parents unable to work and children starving. Anger rose in Calla's belly, a fierce determination to do something. Without hesitation, she gathered together whatever food she could spare, the last of her dried beans, some leftover bread from the trading post, a handful of fresh vegetables from her small garden. She knocked on their door, anxiety churning in her gut. When a weary face greeted her, Calla held out her offerings. "I heard you need help. Please, let me support you." Tears glistened in the mother's eyes as she hesitated, disbelief etched on her features. "Because we're a community," Calla replied, her voice steady. Weeks passed and the bond between them solidified. Calla cooked meals for the family, cared for the children, and brought in neighbors to share the workload. Each day they laughed, swapping stories and sharing burdens. Somehow it went from surviving to thriving as neighbors began to rally together. When she arrived with food, others joined her, their hearts and hands coming alive with purpose. Slowly, they built a network of support, relying on each other in times of need. One night, as they gathered around a warm meal, something shifted in the atmosphere. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable began to crumble. Hope surged forth like a rising tide. Days turned into weeks, and before long, the village was transformed. Calla found herself at the center of a newfound spirit of camaraderie. She had stepped out of her shadows, igniting a spark among those who had once walked by her, heads down, spirits low. But still, she sought the soldier. Each time she returned to the trading post, she scanned the room, searching for him. Her heart raced with anticipation. She wanted to show him how he had unwittingly changed her life. And then, one beautiful spring day, she spotted him. He walked in, his presence commanding the room, the spirit of autumn light trailing behind him like a golden thread. The warmth in his eyes gleamed like the sun breaking through dark clouds. He exclaimed, his smile wide and warm, "Look at this place." At that moment, her heart swelled with pride. "It's incredible," she replied breathlessly. He chuckled softly, disbelief dancing in his eyes. "I just intervened in a moment." Calla felt the warmth of his belief wash over her. "You gave me hope when I was at my lowest." He nodded, acknowledging the depth of her appreciation. "I've seen too many lives go dark when compassion fails." As they stood there, the energy around them shifted. Alive with the hum of community, children laughed, families chatted, and hope thrummed through the air. The soldier's presence was no longer a fleeting memory. He had become part of the heartbeat of the village. "Let's keep this spirit alive," he said, gesturing around them. Calla's heart pounded with purpose as they worked together to plan workshops teaching skills, sharing knowledge, and facilitating conversations that would connect everyone more deeply. Weeks turned into months as they nurtured each other through laughter and learning. Every gathering lit a fire of unity, drawing neighboring villages in to join. Old grievances faded, replaced by bonds that ran deeper than blood. But one autumn evening, a newcomer arrived, a woman with weary eyes and a child clinging to her side. She stood at the edge of the gathering, fear etched across her features. Calla's heart ached as she approached, her resolve unwavering. "Welcome," she said softly. "You're safe here." The woman hesitated, uncertainty clouding her words. "I have nowhere else to go," she finally admitted, vulnerability breaking through her defenses. As Calla listened, her heart swelled with recognition. This woman was a mirror reflecting her old self, a reminder of the darkness that once threatened to consume her. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "You're not alone anymore. We are family here." In that moment, she saw the flicker of hope ignite in the woman's eyes, just as her own had when the soldier had intervened that fateful day. As the seasons shifted, the community continued to grow, a living testament to the transformative power of kindness. They faced challenges together, harsh winters, illnesses, and loss, but through it all, their resilience flourished. Calla often found herself reflecting on how her journey had unfolded. A longing for survival had blossomed into a tapestry of connection. The soldier's unwavering support began as a ripple, but it turned into a tidal wave that changed not just her life but the lives of countless others. And on quiet evenings, as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, the warmth of neighbors gathered around a communal meal, she felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. She had discovered that she was not just a beggar begging for bread. She was a spark of transformation, a fierce force woven into the fabric of her community. In a world that sometimes seemed devoid of kindness, they had created a haven, a safe space where compassion thrived, where hope ignited, and where the shared thread of humanity bound them all. Calla knew deep down that every act of kindness echoed through time like ripples on a pond, spreading light into the darkest corners. Each meal shared was a manifestation of love, every moment spent together a reminder of the strength found in unity. And as the seasons turned, the village continued to flourish, a testament to the power of connection, a vibrant heartbeat illuminating the path forward, where once there had only been shadows. Together, they discovered that kindness was not merely a fleeting moment. It was a legacy, an enduring force capable of transforming the world, one act at a time. The wind howled outside the trading post, sending flurries of snow swirling like frantic dancers in a frigid ballet. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of cured meats and spices, mingling uneasily with despair. The light from the flickering candle cast uncertain shadows, illuminating faces of weary patrons who shuffled through the cramped space, each burdened by their own silent sorrows. In the darkest corner of the room sat Calla, her figure hunched and frail. She was a mere silhouette against the rough wooden beams, her clothes tattered and hanging off her body like remnants of a forgotten dream. Every day felt like a battle, and today was no different. Her stomach growled, a constant reminder of her desperate situation. She almost felt invisible, but the gnawing hunger pulled her back to the harsh reality. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaky but clear. "Just a loaf of bread, I'll work for it." The merchant behind the counter, a massive man with a grizzled beard, barely glanced in her direction. He was engrossed in counting his coins, the clink of metal a stark contrast to the desperation in Kala's eyes. "You want food? Get a job," he grunted, shrugging her off like a pesky fly. Kala's heart sank. Frustration bubbled inside her. She was drowning in a sea of rejection. She looked around at the faces of those in the post, searching for a flicker of empathy, but what she found were cold stares and averted eyes. Her voice grew more desperate as she faced the merchant again. "I'm willing to work." "Not my problem," he barked, waving her away, dismissing her as someone not worth his time. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she felt a wave of humiliation wash over her. In that moment, the one constant in her life, hunger, clashed with a fierce resolve that bubbled up from within her. Kala would not be silenced. But just as she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her, the door swung open with a loud creak. A chill rushed into the room, but in stepped a soldier, a tall figure wrapped in the dignity of his uniform. He exuded an energy that turned heads and silenced murmurs. He asked, his voice steady yet kind. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Kala. A flicker of hope ignited in her. I just need a loaf of bread," she said, voice trembling but determined. The soldier's brow furrowed as he turned to the merchant. His voice rose, filled with intensity that commanded attention. "She's begging. We don't feed beggars here," the merchant shot back, crossing his arms defiantly. Kala watched as the tension hung thick in the air like a storm cloud. The soldier stepped closer, his expression hardening. "What kind of community do we live in where we walk past those who are struggling?" Her heart raced at the words, and for a moment it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. The other patrons leaned in, drawn into the tug-of-war unfolding before them. The merchant shifted uneasily, the weight of the soldier's gaze reflecting the turmoil within him. "I can't just give food away," he mumbled, but the soldier pressed on. "Human decency doesn't come with a price tag. She's hungry." With a deep sigh, the merchant relented, though the look on his face showed it was begrudging. "Fine, 2 loaves. But that's it," he spat as he tossed the bread toward Kala, who caught them instinctively. "Thank you," she managed, tears flooding her eyes as she clutched the loaves tightly against her chest, feeling their warmth radiate through the fabric. This simple act, a humble offering, felt like a small spark of hope kindling inside her. The soldier smiled, a genuine expression that lit up his face. "You don't have to repay this right now." He turned to leave, but not before casting another glance back at Kala. "If you ever need help, find me." And just like that, he was gone, swept away by the wind outside, but the warmth of his presence lingered in the room. Filled with gratitude, Kala took a deep breath as she glanced around. The weight of the post didn't feel quite as heavy anymore. Days turned into weeks, and Kala clung to that moment, that soldier's unwavering belief in her worth. She gathered her strength, determined to make something of her life. Each day, she worked tirelessly, taking any opportunity to help her neighbors, sharing her meager supplies and offering assistance wherever she could. Slowly but surely, the villagers began to notice. As Kala delivered fresh vegetables or helped carry heavy kegs for the elderly, she felt the community wrap around her like a warm blanket. She learned names, listened to stories, and began to weave herself into the fabric of their lives. Yet in quiet moments, the memory of that soldier resurfaced, sparking in her a longing to find him again. She wanted to express her gratitude, to tell him just how much his kindness had ignited a flicker of hope in her soul. But week after week passed, and there was no sign of him. Winter persisted, and Kala's hope wavered. Would he come back? Did he even know the impact he'd made? One evening, she stood outside the post, watching the snowflakes fall, their delicate flutters captivating her attention. Everything felt so still, yet her heart ached with questions that had no answers. But just as she turned to head inside, she spotted a figure trudging through the snow, a heavy coat flapping in the wind. Her heart raced as she recognized him, the soldier. He approached with a familiar warmth in his eyes, a smile breaking across his face like the dawn. He called, brushing the snow from his shoulders as he stepped into the trading post. She asked, her voice a blend of relief and excitement. "I was stationed nearby," he explained, shaking off the cold. His eyes sparkled with admiration. "Your kindness has spread like wildfire." Kala's heart swelled with pride. She felt a connection to him grow stronger. "It all started with you." The soldier nodded, his expression shifting to one of humility. "It takes a village, though. You turn the tide with your actions." As they talked, Kala learned of his time away stories of those who had shown fierce resilience in their struggles. He recounted tales of strangers coming together for mutual aid in other villages, weaving a tapestry of human connection. Inspired, Kala felt the flame of determination reignite within her. "We could do so much more here, you know." The soldier's smile grew wider. "That's the spirit. Let's mobilize. We can plan gatherings, share knowledge, and build workshops." Days turned into weeks and the energy in the village shifted. With the soldier's guidance, Kala took charge, rallying the community to create a series of workshops, a chance for neighbors to come together, to learn, to connect, and to grow. They taught each other useful skills. People shared cooking techniques, taught sewing, and even showed how to forage for wild herbs. Slowly but surely, a newfound sense of community blossomed like fresh blooms breaking through winter's grip. Yet shadows still lingered. As Kala worked tirelessly to uplift the village, the reality of hardship would sometimes creep in. There were always whispers of hunger, echoes of suffering lurking just beneath the surface. One particularly harsh evening, as a storm rolled in, Kala found herself restless. She couldn't shake the weight of anxiety that settled on her heart, sensing a change was coming. Just as she pondered her thoughts, a loud knock startled her from her reverie. When she opened the door, a woman stood drenched in the rain, eyes wide and frantic. "Please, we need help," she gasped, breathless and shaking. "My family is struggling." Panic surged within Kala. Memories of her own desperate days slammed into her like a wave. "Of course, come in." She ushered the woman inside, quickly gathering supplies. As she prepared a meal, she felt a burning determination take shape within her. This was why she had fought so hard, because kindness had power. It could change the trajectory of lives. Later that night, a group began forming, drawn in by the aroma of warmth wafting through the air. Kala welcomed each one with open arms, understanding that together they could forge a path through darkness. The storm outside raged on, but inside a different storm began brewing, a storm of hope, a whirlwind of resilience. Weeks turned into months, and the village transformed into a thriving hub of connection. The soldier's influence could be felt in every corner where laughter and learning flourished. Community members began to rise into leadership roles, empowering others to take small actions that created sweeping change. Sometimes, Kala would catch herself in quiet moments, the soldier's resolve echoing in her heart. "Kindness is a currency," he had said. Her eyes lit up with pride as she marveled at the fruits of their labor. Just as the earth had its seasons, so too had their lives turned from barren to bountiful. One evening, a festival was planned to celebrate their accomplishments, a way to unite their stories and showcase their journey. The village square transformed into a vibrant marketplace, adorned with colorful stalls and cheerful banners. Laughter rang through the air as children played, their innocence untouched by the struggles of life. Kala stepped into the festivities, searching the crowd until she spotted the soldier standing by the bonfire, surrounded by villagers sharing stories of their shared experiences. Their eyes met as he grinned broadly, the warmth in his gaze reflecting the flickering flames that danced around them. "Look what you've built," he said, offering her a hand to join him. As they conversed amidst the celebration, a sense of completion filled Kala's heart. She lifted her voice, calling for attention as she stood before the crowd. "This village is more than just a place on a map. It's a community, a family." Cheers erupted as villagers clapped and shouted their approval. In that moment, Kala realized she had gone from begging for bread to teaching others how to bake their own. She became a guiding light, illuminating paths for those who had once walked in darkness. As the festival continued, the wind that had once brought cold now stirred a sense of belonging and warmth. The village had come alive, a tapestry woven from threads of kindness, strength, and resilience. And at the heart of it all was a young woman who had once begged for survival, now flourishing as a beacon of hope. Kala understood now that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers and roots for change. And all it takes is one small act of kindness to start a movement, creating ripples that can echo endlessly through time. The soldier stood beside her, proud and supportive, a reminder that connections forged in adversity could stand the test of time. Together, they had transformed hearts as well as lives, proving that when you choose to extend a hand, you never know how many lives you may uplift along the way. As night fell and the stars twinkled like diamonds overhead, Kala felt a sense of peace wash over her. They were no longer just a village. They were a community, a family. And that family would keep growing, lighting the way for others, ensuring that no one would ever have to beg for bread again. The winter wind howled, whipping snow against the wooden walls of the trading post like an angry spirit seeking entry. Inside, the air was thick with the smells of cured meats, damp wood, and desperation. Kala, a young woman with a face etched by hardship, crouched in a corner, her thin fingers clutching her empty stomach. She was invisible to the bustling townsfolk, her plea for help drowned out by their chatter and the clinking of coins. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely breaking through the noise. "Just a loaf of bread, I'll work for it." The merchant behind the counter, a gruff man with a thick beard and calloused hands, barely raised his eyes from the goods sprawled before him. He grunted, dismissing her with a wave. "No charity here, girl, you want food." Kala's heart sank, each word a weight pressing down on her. Just days before, she had watched her family suffer under the relentless grip of winter, their laughter replaced by hunger. She needed to fight, she had to. With a shaky breath, she squared her shoulders and took a step forward. "Please," she said again, her voice trembling but resolute. "I can work." The merchant sighed, the annoyance clear on his face. "Not my problem," he muttered, shoving her aside as he went back to his work. Despair threatened to choke her, and she felt the sting of tears prick her eyes. But before she could turn away, the door of the post swung open with a loud creak. In walked a soldier, radiating strength and purpose, his uniform crisp even against the dim light of the room. The bustling conversation quieted as he stepped into the space, his presence commanding immediate attention. He asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Kala's heart raced, hope intertwining with her sense of vulnerability. I just need bread," she stammered, her desperation spilling into her words. "I'll work for it." The soldier turned to the merchant, his expression shifting from curiosity to dismay. "You're denying her food." The merchant crossed his arms defiantly, a scowl etched on his face. "She's a beggar." Kala felt a wave of shame wash over her as the crowd murmured, uncertainty swirling in the air. But the soldier stepped forward, fists clenching at his sides. What kind of community turns its back on those in need? As the silence stretched, the tension felt electric, hanging over them like a storm cloud. Kala's hope flickered as she held her breath, watching the soldier lock eyes with the merchant. She was desperate for something, anything, that could help her survive. Finally, the merchant sighed, his bravado wavering. "Fine," he grumbled, "2 loaves." Kala's hands shook as the merchant pulled the loaves from beneath the counter, tossing them toward her as if he was discarding scraps. "Thank you," she breathed, cradling the warm bread against her chest. It felt like the weight of a lifeline. The soldier's expression softened. "Remember this moment," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Pay it forward when you can." Kala nodded, feeling the warmth of hope kindle within her as he turned to leave. Just before he stepped out into the cold, he glanced back at her. "If you ever need help again, find me." The wind shrieked as the door closed behind him, but his words lingered in the air like a promise. For now, Kala wasn't invisible. Something had shifted inside her. She felt a spark igniting, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Days became weeks, and Kala clung tightly to that moment, the soldier's kindness propelling her forward. She started helping her neighbors with their daily chores, offering what little she could. The more she did, the more strength blossomed within her. Each act of kindness fed not only those she helped, but also her own spirit. And yet she found herself returning frequently to the trading post, scanning the crowd for that soldier. Day after day, she hoped to see him again, longing to express her gratitude. But time passed and the winter lingered, clutching the village with its icy grip. Kala's heart ached, not just for food but for connection, and the haunting thought of whether she would ever see the soldier again. Still, the people in her life became her motivation. Each smile and every shared experience fueled her desire to uplift others. Then one fateful evening, the village square transformed with the arrival of spring. The snow melted, leaving behind puddles that reflected a dimmed sun. Hope began to blossom like the first flowers of the season, and Kala organized gatherings to share food and stories. As laughter echoed through the square, people started to come together, learning to support one another through their shared struggles. Lives intertwined and old divisions faded, replaced by warmth and renewed purpose. Yet the absence of the soldier gnawed at her. One late afternoon, while Kala was preparing for another gathering, a commotion interrupted her. She rushed outside to see villagers gathered around the trading post, tense whispers threading through the air. Pushing through the crowd, her heart raced as she finally spotted the soldier, the very one who had sparked her journey. But he was not alone. He was arguing with a group of men, their faces twisted with disdain and anger. The soldier argued, frustration clear in his voice. "This village is changing for the better." "I don't want any part of it," one of the men snapped back. Kala's heart dropped as she stood frozen, uncertain of what to do. There was tension using the air like a ship on the verge of capsizing, and she hated how helpless she felt. But deep inside her, something shifted. She couldn't just be a bystander. She had fought too hard for her place in this community. Lifting her chin, she stepped forward. "It's not about handouts," she said, voice clear and steady. "It's about standing together, lifting each other in hard times. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to feel like no one cares." The murmurs quieted and the soldier turned, surprise flashing in his eyes. It gave Kala courage. "Everyone has worth," she continued, feeling her heartbeat pulse in rhythm with the words. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty tightening their expressions. One of them shot back, anger boiling just beneath the surface. "It won't last." "They'll take advantage if we don't trust them," Kala replied, standing her ground. "You have to believe in the goodness of people." The soldier looked at her with pride and the other villagers nodded, murmuring their agreement. The tension began to lift, but the men remained unconvinced. "You're naive. You don't know what's lurking beneath the surface," one of them spat. Suddenly, a shout pierced the air. Everyone turned just in time to see a hooded figure sprinting toward them, hands clutching something. Fear surged through the crowd like wildfire as people scattered, ducking for cover. The soldier shouted, raising his voice above the chaos. Kala's heart raced as she braced herself for whatever was coming. But before she could react, the hooded figure lunged toward the soldier, hands thrust forward. The glint of metal flashed as the figure attempted to stab him. The soldier's instincts kicked in and he quickly sidestepped, grabbing the attacker's wrist and twisting, but the two of them fell to the ground in a clash of energy. Panic erupted in the crowd, people yelling, moving back and forth in chaotic panic. Kala's heart raced as she looked on, frozen in shock. She had seen moments of despair, but this felt like something darker, something she couldn't ignore. Then she noticed the glint of steel again, a dagger slipping from the hooded figure's hand, skidding across the cobblestones, almost as if mocking the shouts of alarm around them. Before she could make sense of the situation, her instincts kicked in. As the soldier wrestled with the attacker beneath him, she darted forward, her heart pounding. With swift determination, she snatched the dagger from the ground, raising it to catch the waning light. "Stop!" she shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning to her. The unexpected sight of a determined woman in the midst of chaos stunned them into inaction. The soldier caught glances of her from below, a mix of surprise and admiration reflected in his eyes. He yelled, but she wouldn't falter. "You want to hurt him," she declared, holding the dagger steady, her voice unwavering despite the fear thrumming within her. The hooded figure froze, eyes darting between the soldier and Kala, calculating. In that moment of uncertainty, the tension turned thick, raw with possibility. Would they fight? Would she protect the soldier who had ignited a spark in her? Kala's breath came in quick bursts as she felt the weight of the moment. The crowd remained still, waiting for the conflict to unfold, comprehension dawning on all of them. This was a turning point, a decision that would shape the community for years to come. Eyes locked on the danger, Calla knew that something had shifted, and whatever the outcome, this moment could change everything. Would unity rise or would chaos prevail? It all hung in the balance, suspended in time. With the dagger steady in her hand and her heart pounding, she stood ready for whatever came next. The future brought uncertainty, and she was prepared to face it head-on, fueled by a promise of hope and a will to protect those she now loved. All that mattered was the moment, and she was ready to fight for her place in this world. And then it happened.